Hi everybody, and welcome to this event organised by Labour and Palestine along with Arise, a festival of left ideas. My name's Rachel Garnham. We're going to have a really interesting conversation this evening, I think, about what's going on in Palestine at the moment. It's obviously a vital time. The genocide continues and is increasingly recognised as such internationally and locally, including by Labour conference just a few weeks ago. We have the Trump plan, which obviously we'll be talking about this evening, continued violations of the ceasefire by Israel, and nowhere near enough aid reaching the Palestinians. So still devastating conditions there. We have the situation in the West Bank that people will be following, and domestically the criminalisation of pro-Palestinian protesters here in Britain. So it's in this context, it's good to see so much support for the people of Palestine continuing. We had hundreds and thousands of people on the streets again just 10 days ago, and there is a lot of interest in the continuing work of Labour in Palestine and, of course, the vital work of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Thousands of people have already signed the new Labour in Palestine petition calling for the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador, and unbelievable, really, isn't it, that they are still welcome. We're delighted to have a range of speakers with us today to discuss developments and the need for our continuing solidarity and what that might include. Our MPs are just caught up in some votes, so they'll be joining us later on. Jess Barnard unfortunately can't make it, but we have got some great speakers to examine what is going on in Palestine at the moment. And without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, who is Ryvka Barnard, the Deputy Director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Over to you, Ryvka.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Rachel, and good to see so many people here tonight. And thanks always to Labour in Palestine for the great work that you all have been doing. So I just want to speak briefly about what I see are the challenges ahead for the Palestinian people in light of everything that you've just mentioned, Rachel, and what those challenges mean for us in the solidarity movement as a result. But also I want to mention some of the gains we've been making and where to look from here. This past week, I was lucky to have the chance to spend some time with Sahar Francis, who's a renowned Palestinian human rights lawyer, someone who's been for decades advocating for the rights of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli detention. And Sahar was visiting from Palestine here in Britain on a speaking tour, and we were in a meeting together on Monday last week, on the 13th, when nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners were released by Israel as a part of that ceasefire deal, the so-called Trump plan. And I think, like the other scenes that all of us saw this past week, we all felt a huge relief, of course, to see people in Gaza heading back to their homes, but also that sort of unbearable sadness and heaviness, knowing that they were heading back to completely bombed out areas, still food and water deprived, and without the security of knowing if this is really an end. And if it is, it's only an end to the worst of horrors, the relentless bombing, but the injury and the mourning and the devastation continue because Israel's apartheid system and the siege that the people of Palestine have been suffering and surviving is ongoing, of course. I think, in a similar vein, seeing those nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners released was incredibly moving. And to see them being able to embrace their families, for those who were able to come back to families, of course, some people were released only to find out the horrible news of their families having been killed. But, after the unimaginable conditions that those prisoners were facing, And you wouldn't know it, of course, from watching the British media coverage, even if little snippets did come through about the systematic torture, I mean, unspeakable torture that Palestinians imprisoned by Israel have been facing. And mind you, the vast majority of those people who were released had been imprisoned en masse, some of them from hospitals, from when Israel attacked and besieged hospitals and just arrested all of the medical workers, the patients in the hospitals, the journalists trying to report. So the scenes that we saw were both kind of uplifting, but also harrowing, and the stories behind them even worse. So Sahar, this Palestinian lawyer I was with, I mean, her mobile phone was just pinging constantly on Monday, and it was the families of prisoners asking her, just, do you have any more information? Are there going to be more people released? Because even though almost 2,000 Palestinians were released, Israel still holds over 9,000 Palestinians as political prisoners, and this includes hundreds of children, actually more than 400 Palestinian children. And this ceasefire has not eased the conditions for them at all. And it also it didn't stop Israel from conducting more mass arrest raids in the West Bank the same week that those prisoners were being released. And it didn't stop Israeli settlers over this past weekend from rampaging through the West Bank, attacking Palestinian families who were harvesting their olive crop. And that's really, I mean, unfortunately, we've come to expect that, but how perverse is that? That the olive harvest, which is supposed to be a really joyful time for Palestinians, I mean, the olive harvest is such a deep part of Palestinian heritage and also so many people's livelihoods. But now it's become a time of terror for Palestinians because of the systematic settler attacks. So, I'm saying this just to point to those challenges ahead. This is a snapshot, I think, of what Palestinians are facing. And I think the prisoners issue really encapsulates that larger difficulty, right? So how do we hold the hope and the relief of this ceasefire as long as it does last, but also make sure that we don't even for 1 minute let go of what's missing in it? And what Palestinians are still facing, and the depths of Israel's oppression that's so deep that an end to bombing is just a tip of the iceberg of the justice that the Palestinian people need and deserve. I think for us then in the solidarity movement, we need to keep our campaigning up despite attempts by politicians and by some parts of the media to brush aside what has happened and what's still happening, and to brush aside British complicity in it, because we know, of course, that this government, despite attempts to convince us otherwise, has not stopped shipping weapons to Israel, which is really the bare minimum of what it should have been doing from the beginning. And along with attempts to deny the genocide and to deny the ongoing apartheid system, this government also has renewed its attempts, as you've mentioned, Rachel, to repress our right to campaign and to protest. And this time it's Labour politicians and not Suella Braverman who are smearing and defaming the hundreds of thousands of us who take to the streets to oppose genocide. I think as a solidarity movement, as a movement in this country, we have to face this head on. We have to fight the government's upcoming attacks on our right to protest, but we also have to know and recognize those attempts for what they are, which is not only an assault on our rights, but also a tactic to deflect responsibility and to deflect attention away from this government's ongoing complicity and its failure to take the action that it's required to do. If you look at the text of the Genocide Convention, to which, of course, Britain is a signatory, it talks about the need for states to punish and prevent acts of genocide. And this government has not only failed to do that so far as we know, but it's actively aided and abetted genocide, just as it continues to aid and abet apartheid. And it's through the great activism and grassroots organizing of the labor movement and delegates and trade unionists that motion at Labor Conference that you mentioned passed this year. And it does chart a way forward for us and gives us a new tool for us to use to confront the government over this. The government has an ongoing responsibility to prevent further acts of genocide, but also to hold those who have committed acts of genocide to account. And I think that's very core to what we should be holding at the center of our work for Palestine. But it's not only for government at the national level, but in local government too. And this is also a place where there's been amazing, amazing organizing over the past few years of local residents and pension holders, together with trade unionists, of course, who have built coalitions locally together in 23 local councils that have committed to ending their investments in companies that are profiting from genocide and apartheid. So there have been 23 massive victories in local councils, and there's dozens more campaigns like this around the country, which is really exciting. And I think it's a really important place for us to be pushing further. There's a huge amount of work that's happening locally. And for those of you who are listening, who aren't already a part of your local PSE branch, I really encourage you to get involved and to take part in some of these campaigns. Of course, also there's our huge national marches for Palestine that are in and of themselves successes, I would say, against attempts to repress us, against attempts to make people in this country forget about Palestine and to forget about the roots of the labor movement itself as an internationalist movement, as a movement for peace and justice, and for a movement that strives to end apartheid and genocide wherever it happens. Just going back to the friend I spoke about, Sahar, the lawyer I was speaking about earlier, in one of the meetings she was addressing this past week when she was here, she said, listen, you all have to know the huge marches in London have given the Palestinian people hope amidst so much despair over the past 2 years, and also a renewed belief that the world has not abandoned the Palestinian people, even if governments have. But she also said this, please, just because Trump has declared that this war is over, and just because the British government seems to be ready to move on, please, now more than ever, don't stop marching and don't stop campaigning. There's a huge amount of work for us to do. And further to that, everyone here who's online in this meeting will have a chance, I hope, to join us at the next National March for Palestine, which is going to be on Saturday, the 29th of November, which is the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. So please do mark your calendars for that date. We're going to be formally announcing it tomorrow, I think. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody there. Thanks again, Rachel, and thanks again to Labor in Palestine for hosting me and for everyone who has tuned in.
Thanks ever so much, Ryvka. And my question to speakers is always, what can we do? And I feel like you've really addressed that question with, lots of things that people can do and get involved in. So when it comes to questions, please, everyone joining, do put your questions in the Q&A. We should have plenty of time to ask some questions. And it's great to see so many of you joining, and do introduce yourself as well in the Q&A and say where you're joining from and what you're involved in. And thanks to those who already put their questions in. I'm next going to introduce Ben, who's one of our Arise volunteers, who's going to say a little bit about Arise.
Hi, I hope you can hear me okay. I've got a bell going off in the room that I'm in. So yeah, thanks for joining us this evening. I'm assuming you can hear me okay.
We can.
I'm Ben Foley, and I'm a volunteer with Labour in Palestine. I just want to do a quick plug to highlight the work that goes into building these events and to ask for your support to keep them going through a donation, if you're able to help us out with that. And just to say, this is as ever a volunteer-run event that goes through a load of activities, from preparing graphics to promote it, running social media, setting up the registration, liaising with the speakers, operating the streaming, and it's been a bit of a difficult event for us tonight. Some of our volunteers aren't well, speakers haven't been able to come, the MPs are coming late. And actually, this big Amazon Web Services outage yesterday actually stopped people registering for the event. So I'm hoping it's not hit our attendance too much, but we do seem to have a good crowd. So that's one of the things we have to deal with when we're building these online events and relying on people being able to get here online. But it's a great event. It's been great to hear from Ryvka already. We've got Hugh, and we're going to have the MPs coming along in a bit. I'm just looking at when the votes are taking place. But given the costs and the technical requirements of putting these events on, maintaining the mass mailing lists and the Zoom accounts and restreaming and the time it takes to do all of that, we are very keen that anyone who is able to makes an online donation. So a colleague of mine should put a link in the chat, and we'll do that again at the end of the meeting. So if you can help, that would be really, really appreciated. And that's it from me. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for everything you and all the other volunteers do to bring these events into our homes, because they're so educational and important, and gives people the opportunity to ask questions as well, which I reiterate you can do. So our next speaker is Hugh Lanning from Labour and Palestine. Over to you, Hugh.
Thank you, Rachel, and thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. Am I coming through? Yes. The time of the meeting is really, really critical. The media and the government sort of pushing out the message they think it's all over, that peace has been done and that there's not a lot to do now, is a really dangerous message, and one that we have to counter. And tonight's meeting and the discussion is in our minds to try and think about, well, how do we continue the campaigning and keep up the pressure that is going to be required? But as Ryvka said, I think it's important that we do just acknowledge the relief and bit of respite that the Palestinians are now getting. And it's not because of the generosity of Trump or the Israelis, it's because of the resilience and the resistance of the Palestinian people and the global solidarity campaign that this has happened. And I just think we need to keep in our minds, if you like, what's been going on in Gaza and the West Bank and in East Jerusalem as well. That I think it's very difficult for us to comprehend what life is like. You know, we talk of the number of deaths, we talk of genocide, we talk of apartheid, we talk of starvation, but these aren't things that the majority of us ever experience. And it's a story I've told before, but it was brought home to me when I was able to get to Gaza a number of years ago. And we were having lunch in a refugee camp on trestle tables. And I was speaking and sitting next to this Palestinian who I think he was sat next to me because he was of a similar age and he could speak English. And he was very politely asking me about why I was there and my family and what I did and why I'd come to Palestine. And being British, I politely asked him back, how's his family? And without any drama, he just then explained and went through how his wife had been killed, his parents had died, all as a result. His children, he was the only one left of his family. Everyone else had been killed in the course of the various wars and assaults by Israel. And, you know, we get grief and upset when a close one dies to us. And I don't think we understand whole families, whole towns and villages being razed to the ground is something beyond our comprehension. And so I think there is definite relief, but we need to keep that hole in our heads all the way through. And I just am staggered, and even though the press aren't allowed in, how the Palestinians are still caring for each other, looking after each other, feeding each other, keeping some life going. There are still hundreds of thousands, millions of Palestinians living and existing in this climate of war and attrition that Israel has created. And I think that's still the case. It's not changed. And even if some aid starts getting through, it's not going to reform or change overnight the situation the Palestinians have been surviving over the recent years, indeed over decades. And the Trump plan, which everyone talks about, it's not his plan, it's Israel's plan. He's adopted it, and he is using his power to seek to implement it. And if you read the short one-page fact packet solution that he's come up with, it includes no self-determination for the Palestinian people. There's no reference to there being a Palestinian state, despite Western governments saying they were going to call for a two-state solution. It's not in the plan. And this isn't surprising because Israel has never recognized Palestine. It has never recognized the need for there to be a Palestine. It has never set its own border. It's never limited its own border. And indeed, its leaders continuously say publicly that there will never be a free state of Palestine that they will recognize, and their intention to evolve towards a greater Israel, which encompasses all the land from the river Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, is clearly their intention. It's their view to eliminate from the global map Palestine as an entity of any shape or size. And you can see that this is the real endeavor, this colonial endeavor, from the actions that are taking place by Western governments. In the States, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is lining up companies to come and make money out of the reconstruction of Gaza. And not far behind, the British government, the UK government, has just held a gala, a PFI gala, as if we hadn't learned the lessons about PFI, but for companies, again, to make profit out of the genocide in Gaza by helping with the reconstruction. And so it's clear what his intent is: not a free Palestine, but is a neo-colonial enterprise in which the West, the US and Israel will run and control things. And I think it's important to realize the other huge obstacle there is to peace or any just solution. It is that Israel's view of any solution has always been based on what they describe as differential rights, namely that Israeli Jews need to be protected by law, to have a superior status, better rights, better education system in every respect. And that was part of the foundation laws on which Israel was created. Its national law, which it has recently, in the last decade, reaffirmed that it's not an equal democracy for people. It's one in which the Jewish population is going to have the ascendancy, so that when they talk about any arrangement in the historic area of Palestine, it is never based on the notion of equality. And I think that's a key issue for those who are talking about what happens in the future, is that any solution needs to be based on equal rights for all people who live between the Mediterranean Sea and the River Jordan. And if it isn't that, then what we're recreating and what we're persevering with is the apartheid regime that has been created. And the talk of the solution, people start arguing about borders and where they might be, and whether it's one or two states or no states or whatever. But I think there's a very practical thing. If you're Palestinian, what is changing as a consequence of the implementation of any plan that might emerge? And there's been 70 years of colonization by Israel. There's the wall, hundreds of kilometers long. Is there any proposal or idea that that will be taken down, moved back within, if you like, the 67 borders? The settlements, now approaching 1 million settlers. Is it being discussed that the settlers will go? OCHA recently produced a map, which I'd show you if it showed up, of where all the settler violence attacks have taken place. And it is across the whole of the West Bank There is no area of Palestine from which they're safe from settler violence or from Israeli attacks. If you look at the other areas where Ryvka talked about the prisoners, but there are so many aspects. And I was at a meeting the weekend in Cheltenham with Jonathan Porritt, and he was formerly of the Green Party, or still is in the Green Party. So he was talking at length about the ecocide that Israel has committed, whereby they've destroyed the agriculture, the farms, the agricultural land, the distribution points for food, the water and land they've poisoned. They've taken control or seeking to take control of the resources. In all manner of means, they're actually trying to make Gaza an impossible place to live and to operate. And they are committing not just crimes against people, but crimes against nature that are going to take decades and decades to put right. And so you see that picture, and it's easy to go on about how terrible it is and lose sight a little bit of where the UK government stands and where the Labour Party stands. Because it started off, if you like, we were concerned about the Labour Party not calling for an early ceasefire. And the fact that they've, after the event, if you like, after it was too late, after over 60,000 had been killed, said there should be a ceasefire. We need to be clear that this isn't just a case that the Labour Party and the UK government sat back and did nothing. They have been an active participant in the war on the Palestinian people and remain so. Obviously, the focus is on the sale and trade in arms, which needs to be ended completely. But it goes much further and much deeper than that. The military have been involved in providing naval and air support. The security services have provided intelligence support. And we still continue to trade both financially and militarily with Israel, so that when it comes to the reckoning, which there will surely be at some point, it is not just going to be Netanyahu and the war criminals who should be being held to account in The Hague. It should be those in the Labour government who have also been responsible for it, because ceasefire or not, whatever you choose to call it, those crimes are not being undone. They have been committed. They were war crimes, remain war crimes, for which those responsible need to be held account. And there've been a lot of talk about red lines, but Israel has crossed virtually every possible red line one can conceive of, from the Nakba, through the occupation, through the wall, through the settlements, to what's gone on since October 23, and the deliberate use of starvation building up to genocide is unheard of, and the Western governments have let it happen. And genocide, and Ryvka referred to this, is not just a word. It was invented as a law brought in as a result of the genocide in the Second World War. And the idea behind the genocide law was to stop it happening again. And you got David Lammy getting up and saying, well, it's not genocide because not enough people had died yet. The deaths weren't high enough for it to actually count as a genocide. And that's the whole point, is that in the light of history, governments today are meant to act and take action, prevent it happening again. And we've failed to do that. And that is going to be a lasting legacy of this government. And it sounds like a horrible scenario. And at the same meeting I was referring to, one of the questions was, are we pessimistic or optimistic about the future? And I'm optimistic. I suppose one has to be to carry on campaigning. But actually, the world has changed since October 23. Young people For my sins, I've resumed life as a student and meet perhaps more young people than I would have done normally. And they're aware of what's going on and they know which side they're on. It's not the young generation that are apolitical or don't know which who is right and who is wrong. And you see that in the marches and the rallies and the demonstrations. But also Israel has lost global opinion. It was sympathized with, it was supported, it had a lot of global support. But I think through its actions, it has lost that support across the world, across many governments, in a way that it's never going to be able to put back. It is always going to have the legacy of what it is doing now around its neck. And it is a war-based economy, Israel. It relies on war for making its money, for building its economy, and for keeping things going. And it's dependent on aid. And therefore, I think it is really vulnerable going forward, unless there is a genuine seeking of peace and a seeking of a true and just settlement. And as I said, self-determination doesn't seem to be on the agenda for the Americans or the British, but it is the only solution that there can be, and one that is coupled with decolonization of all the apparatus of the regime that Israel has created. So what do we do in those circumstances? Rachel was saying, she always asks, what do we do? Well, I think it is to keep on, and it's great to hear there's going to be another march in the end of November, but also boycott, divestment and sanctions. BDS needs to become bigger, deeper and stronger. If you look back to the South African anti-apartheid campaign, boycott was the default position of people. When they knew and spotted something South African, they didn't buy it. And we need that to be the norm for boycott. And similarly with divestment, we want pension funds, local authorities, trade unions, all to be involved in actively campaigning for the divestment from companies that are complicit. And we have a lot of work to do to make sure that these aren't just exceptional victories which are taking place, but it becomes the standard position. But obviously we need sanctions. We need governments to act and take sanctions. We could stop what's going on. We could turn off the tap of aid and military support to Israel anytime we chose to. And it's only the political pressure that the solidarity movement have been amazing, what's been organised in terms of the national marches and all of the pressure that's been going on. And we need to keep that going. And it's often thought, well, how do I do it? And it's she's in the next room, so she can't hear. But my partner, Catherine, she went out the last couple of weekends just with leaflets around the local shops and in the high street, just handing them to people in the bakers, in the butchers, in the library, and got a really positive response. And from school children in the co-op. And I think we need to make sure that we're not just talking to ourselves about what's going on, but we're talking to people who we haven't talked to before, either in the family, in our union branch, in the Labour Party, wherever. We need to mainstream this issue more than we ever have. We don't want to be corralled into the area where the government and Labour Party is trying to make us be. We need to reach out and get all of those people. And I think the really encouraging thing about the last Labour Party conference was that the debate around Palestine and that there is a genocide taking place did take place. The hierarchy tried to move heaven and earth to stop that debate taking place, but those submitting the motions held firm. They then tried heaven and earth to stop the version of the motion they wanted being talked about and speakers in favour of it being heard. None of that succeeded. And in the end, the motion that accepted that what is going on is a genocide was overwhelmingly passed. And that gives me faith and confidence that when not bullied, when allowed, the overwhelming majority of not just party members, but ordinary people in this country support Palestine and don't like the role that the British government is playing, hate what is going on, and are determined that they will carry on campaigning until there is a free Palestine. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, and I hope you'll have contributions as well as questions about what can be done. And I think it is the combination of going everywhere, reaching the parts that have not been reached before is the solution, both big and little, so that we can make a difference going forward. So hopefully there's questions, and hopefully our MPs will be knocking on the door imminently, and we will be carry on campaigning. And I think we'll mention it again later on, but there's a further Labour and Palestine event on the 1st of December, where we've invited Mustafa Barghouti, who has spoken to our meetings before, to give us an update direct from Palestine, which I'm sure will be a great event. So that's it, Rachel. Thanks very much for the opportunity, and hopefully there'll now be some questions before the MPs turn up.
Yep, we've got plenty of questions. Although I'll come to Ryvka first, because you get a glass of water. Thanks, Hugh. Covered so much ground there, and actually you might have covered some of these questions already, but here we go. Anyway, so the first question, there's quite a few. You don't have to, answer them all. You just sort of pick the ones that you think will be most. You've got most to illuminate the situation on. So. And I'm assured that the MPs are expected sort of imminently. So I'll let you know when I get to the end of the questions how long you've got to answer them. So the first one is, where do we go from here? And I think both of you have addressed that. But what else can we and the Palestine Solidarity Campaign do to ensure future accountability of British politicians who have supported the genocide? And related to that from Phil, will there really be accountability for Israel's genocide? So there is that accountability question, which Hugh, you sort of already referred to. The second one is, why is Britain not protecting the aid convoys and the aid routes and depots on the coast and the sovereignty of Palestine? So I think there's something there about aid and what more Britain should be doing to, rather than wringing its hands, actually, trying to ensure that aid is reaching the people who need it. Third was a comment actually from Tony from Bedford's Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and a shout out because that's my local area for the campaign they've launched this week around divestment. So although this wasn't particularly a question, I think there is something for those of us who are active locally, both in local government and, in my own case, the divestment campaign in my employer, for which is a university and university sort of investments, which we're all sort of campaigning around. So it's around boycott, divestment and sanctions. And there's also a comment from Tony, who wanted to make the point that last week the offices of the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions in Nablus in the West Bank were attacked by Israeli forces. The offices were ransacked and vandalised, staff were detained. This is a civil organisation, and this makes it clear that this was an act which is designed to smash the trade union movement in Palestine. So the I2UC and the UK 2UC have called for those responsible to be held to account. But I think, thank you, Tony, for bringing that to our attention and sort of underlining the importance of our work in trade unions to show solidarity with Palestine. And as a member of UCU, I'm sort of glad that my union is doing that, but we can do that locally as well as in our unions nationally. And the final question is, what evidence is there that the reports of fighting between Hamas and other paramilitary forces in Gaza are evidence of attempts by Israel to continue conflict and destabilize Hamas through proxy forces? So there's a few about campaigning and accountability in this country, but I think if you can address some of the issues around aid and what's going on now in Palestine, that would be great too. And I've just been told that Richard is on his way and will be with us shortly. So if you can keep your responses to sort of around 3 to 4 minutes each, then we can hopefully Richard and John will be with us. So Ryvka first, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah. I think, let's see, I'll try to speak to a few of those different elements. I think um, the question of accountability is really important, and I think it's really important for us um, to raise and keep on the agenda as we move forward in our lobbying, especially of politicians. And the attack on the Palestinian trade union offices, I think, is a piece of that, because similar to that attack, and of course it's not the first time, but the Israeli military fairly regularly, though, not every day, attacks Palestinian civil society organizations, trade unions, NGOs, and the attack on the trade unions has followed. Also, the Israeli government has had a campaign for many, many years to attack Palestinian human rights organizations, and particularly those who have submitted evidence to the International Criminal Court, documenting Israel's violations of Palestinian rights. So there's been a sort of ongoing campaign to try to attack Palestinian civil society. Now, the reason why that point about the ICC is important goes back to why we can't trust or rely on the U.S. government, the Trump government. Of course, that's not a surprise to anyone, but not long before the Trump plan was published, the U.S. government actually imposed sanctions on 4 Palestinian human rights organizations. And what was in common between those 4 organizations is that all of them have been involved in submitting evidence to the ICC. So we know that the United States has long been attacking the ICC, not only over having opened a case into Palestine, but also focused on Afghanistan and some of the other illegal wars that the U.S. has been a part of. But I think this attempt to prevent Palestinians from submitting evidence or to attack the ICC, to sanction the ICC itself, is a really pernicious campaign. And the British government is a very active participant in the ICC, and it's actually, one of the sort of configuring members of the ICC. And it shouldn't be difficult for the British government to be taking a stance, first of all, to support the ICC and the ICJ, and to actively commit to respecting and upholding the independence of those international bodies, so that Palestinians can have avenues of accountability and of justice for the crimes that have been committed against them, and also what's currently happening. I think it's really important. We've been starting to ask, and this is something that we'll continue to do, especially in our next mass lobby day, which is also coming up in November, is to be pushing British politicians to push the British government to protect Palestinian human rights organizations that are doing the work. Of course, in some ways, those human rights organizations shouldn't be the ones who are relied upon to be either delivering aid, as the UN is. That's not a Palestinian organization, of course, but also to be doing the documenting of the human rights abuses. But they are doing that work. And in many cases, the Palestinians who are being subjected to abuse, Palestinians who have survived Israel's genocide, are also documenting it very, very carefully so that it can be submitted as evidence to the ICC. And it's really important, if we're talking about accountability, to be supporting and protecting those who are submitting evidence to the ICC. I think that's a very key thing, and that's not a tall ask for British politicians. The ICC and the ICJ are institutions that the British government ostensibly supports. So I think that's an important part of the conversation that we need to keep going forward. Just a last thing to say on divestment campaigns. I think there's a huge amount of scope for divestment campaigns, both across universities, as you mentioned, Rachel, and also across local councils. And the PSC has recently sent an expert legal opinion to local councils across the country that takes into account the British government's responsibilities under the Genocide Convention, and that includes local government. So investment in companies that are profiting from genocide puts local councils at risk if they're continuing those investments. So there's a fairly new legal opinion on that, and that's meant to be a tool for local campaigners to use in their divestment campaigns. So you can find information about that on the PSC website. But again, I mean, I mentioned it in passing, but it's really quite phenomenal that there are 23 local councils who have made commitments to divesting from companies that are profiting from Israel's violations of Palestinian rights. That's a huge number of local victories, and there's so many more campaigns going on. So I think it's really exciting to hear about new ones forming. And I think now is the time also. I mean, for anybody who's involved in local politics who hasn't been a part of a divestment campaign, it's a perfect next step for people to be taking, to get involved, to push for accountability and to push for ongoing justice for the Palestinian people.
Thank you so much, Ryvka. Yeah, that's really inspiring. And I think that legal advice can work for all of us involved in divestment. So, your expertise around what is a genocide and what our responsibilities are is something we can really need to take away from this. Hugh, over to you to respond to any or each of those questions. Thank you.
I certainly won't do each of them. You've probably heard enough from me already tonight, but one, and it was, I presume it's Tony, our great supporter in Bedford, who raised the question about the PGFTU and the trade unions, as Ryvka said, in Palestine, both their equivalent, which the PGFTU is, or RTUC, but also local organisations have been heavily attacked, but survive within Palestine, within the settlements and elsewhere. They try and organise in really, really difficult circumstances. But it prompted me to talk about one issue which I think is really important. The trade unions have got a great history of international solidarity. They were really critical at the Labour Party conference in us getting the motion through. And most of the trade unions of this country are affiliated to the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and have good policies on Palestine. But I don't think they're pulling their weight as much as they should across the board. And a visible sign of that is on the marches. There's great numbers of trade unionists there, I'm sure, but the banners, the balloons, the large numbers of trade unionists visibly there are not present. And I think there's a sort of gap, if you like, which needs to be breached. And I think people involved here in their own trade unions and people who know people in trade unions, we need to close that gap to make sure that the policies of the trade unions become a reality in terms of action. And I think the defence industry is a really, really good example. When I had the privilege of chairing the PSC for a number of years, one of the things that we did was talk to the trade unionists within the companies who are involved in the illicit trade with Israel and talk with the campaigners. And the idea was to get a pincer movement from within the companies urging that they should not be involved in breaches of international law and externally trying to bring pressure to bear so that they end the arms trade. And I know the PSC has got a major conference coming up with trade unions, but I think it's one area where there is real scope for us to develop and build on what is there, which is good, but it's one area where we can really make a difference. And Ryvka talked about local authorities. Again, unions can play a major role in doing that, as they can in universities and elsewhere. So I think that, and in that same sort of way, going back to the anti-apartheid movement, I think the churches are places where, in New York, which is quite renowned for its church, there is a lot of activity within the local churches of all denominations, and I think we're going to need to breach and get involved in that as well, to mobilise the many people of religion who fundamentally disagree with what's going on, and that's Muslims, that's Jews, that's Christians, that's people of all denominations. Just on very briefly on the question about what's going on in northern Gaza and elsewhere, I just think we need to reflect that Israel has a huge evident track record of playing war games within Palestine. You know, the legend is, and there's facts about it, that it funded Hamas in order to try and undermine the PLO. It seeks to infiltrate, undermine in every way it can the Palestinian organizations, so that we have to assume that they have not walked away from Gaza and allowing it to do its own thing. We've seen that through the raids that are taking place, and we see it in the delays on the aid. That is still Israel wanting to control Gaza and what goes on. And its view, as I said earlier, is that it does not want there to be a free state of Palestine. It wants to retain total control of all of the area over which it currently has military rule and control. And there's no sign that it is wanting to take that away. So it's going to require huge international pressure. The convoys ought to be rolling in their thousands rather than their hundreds to take aid. And that's just not happening as it should. And the British government, again, is complicit in not applying pressure to do that or putting aid and support on the ground. And on the accountability point, which I think Ryvka has covered, we should be aware that Tony Blair should be in the frame for previous war crimes. It's not easy to get leaders of governments held account for the wars that they have been involved in, and therefore we've got a real opportunity but a real challenge here to try and make sure that those culpable across the West for allowing and supporting Israel are held to account. It's easy to focus on Netanyahu and the war criminals in Israel, but they couldn't have done it unless we'd helped them and allowed them to do it.
Thank you, Hugh, and thank you to both of you for sort of addressing all those questions. Before we move on to our next speaker, I just wanted to flag one more point in the chat, actually, in the question and answer around the student protests that are taking place around employers being invited to recruitment fairs and as part of partnerships. And although there's a sort of question about how we can support that, I think I did want to show some solidarity with those students who are taking action and the role that they're playing in the movement. So I'm delighted to welcome our next speaker, who is hot-footed it from multiple votes, and thank you so much, Richard Burgon, for making the effort to join us, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Rachel. And thank you to Labour and Palestine for the invitation, which I really appreciate. And thank you for what you've all done in demanding justice for the Palestinian people. As I said on the recent national demonstration the other Saturday, the marches and the campaigning of you and millions more have made a real difference. Ordinary people all across the country stood up for our common humanity when those in power just refused to do so. You didn't look away while a genocide was being live streamed. You didn't walk away as children were deliberately starved. You didn't stay silent as hospitals were bombed with weapons the Western government supplied. You've been the conscience our country needed in these dark times. And yet, our protests, our campaigning have been demonised by those who never lifted a finger to stop the genocide. But thanks to voices like yours all across the world, we now have a ceasefire. No one will ever forget the scenes of those children dancing with joy as a ceasefire was announced. However limited, however fragile it is, that ceasefire is an important step for the Palestinian people. We need to do all we can to ensure that it holds. Already we've seen Israeli attacks continuing, which is unforgivable. And we must do all that we can to get the aid in. But we need more than just a ceasefire. We need more than just a pause in the genocide. We need real peace. We need a total end to Israel's war on the Palestinian people. We need a total end to all Israel's illegal settlements. We need a total end to the ethnic cleansing. In short, we need a total end to the entire occupation. And we need the war criminals who carried out this genocide to face justice. So that means this isn't the time to stop our campaigning, as the powers that currently be are now demanding. This is a time to redouble our efforts. And we won't take lectures from people telling us to stop campaigning when they never even started to do what was needed over a genocide. And we will not allow them to go unchallenged over their attempts to crush the pro-Palestine movement by making our protests illegal, or by frankly outrageous slurs that our movement is anti-Semitic because we don't think football hooligans from Israel have a right to impose violence on local communities. No, our message is clear. We will stop our campaigning when there's an end to the occupation. We will stop our campaigning when there is justice and self-determination for the Palestinian people. And to be clear, by self-determination, we don't mean Tony Blair and others deciding what happens to the Palestinian people. He's caused enough damage in the Middle East. And we don't mean selling off Palestinian land to their mates for profit. In recent months, the International Courts of Justice and the United Nations have been clear. Israel's entire occupation is illegal. They say all states must end any support, economic, trade, military or diplomatic support that sustains it. They say every government, including our government, has a legal duty to impose sanctions on Israel. Let's remember, sanctions helped end apartheid in South Africa, and they can end Israel's crimes too. But after everything the movement has been through, I'm not expecting that to happen from our government without a huge push from below. So it falls to us and to all people of conscience to force the action required. For some, that will mean boycotting goods made in the illegal settlements or divesting their pension funds from companies funding the war machine. For me, it's why I've published a new bill for sanctions on Israel. It's a bill for widespread sanctions until Israel's occupation ends, a bill for economic sanctions on Israel, a ban on all trade with Israel's illegal settlements, a full arms embargo on Israel, an end to the UK-Israel trade deal until Israel upholds international law, and sanctions on all those responsible for upholding the occupation. That's what's in the bill. That's what our humanity demands, and it's what international law demands. And let's take heart, actually, from how the global movement for sanctions in Israel is growing. And at the forefront of that movement is the Hague Group, a new coalition led by South Africa, pushing for coordinated sanctions and arms embargoes. And I'm proud to have attended its launch meeting, and delighted that the Hague Group has now held a second meeting, hosted by Colombia, involving over 30 countries. Grassroots pressure means sanctions are also on the agenda across Europe. Ireland, Slovenia, Belgium, Spain and the Netherlands have all made commitments to suspend trade with Israel's illegal settlements and to push for the suspension of the EU-Israel trade deal. That has happened because of our campaigns. So I'll end on this quote from Martin Luther King, who said, "There's no noise as powerful as the marching feet of a determined people." So my message is, keep on marching, keep on campaigning, keep on boycotting, keep demanding sanctions, because you are making a real difference, a difference that will one day help to bring about a free Palestine. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you for bringing the policy of the Labour Party into Parliament, and thank you for being one of our representatives who listens to Labour Party members, trade unionists and voters on these issues. I'd like to thank everyone for coming to this evening's event. It's been inspiring and educational. Thank you to Labour and Palestine volunteers for organising, and Arise Festival for hosting. If you haven't done so already, please donate. Remember that, as Ryvka said, we all need to be out on the streets again on the 29th of November. Labour and Palestine's next event will be on the 1st of December, as Hugh has already said. Richard quoted Martin Luther King. I was helping my daughter with her homework the other day and was about doing a project on Nelson Mandela, and I was reminded of his famous quote, which has never been more apt. We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. So let's keep going, and thank you. Solidarity, everyone.